Good evening, and welcome to a community conversation of the Lorentzen Center for Faith and Work, a program of the Offutt School of Business at Concordia College. My name is Per Anderson, Interim Director of the Center. Established 9 years ago, the Center honors the life of Norman Lorentzen, Concordia graduate, CEO of Burlington Northern Railway, Regent of the College, and generous philanthropist. The Center seeks to integrate faith and work in support of the vision of the Offutt School to serve society through ethical leaders who are confident, curious, and globally competent. This evening, we continue a conversation begun last year about good work for flourishing life. Informed by the social thought of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, we looked at the state and prospects for respect, engagement, and meaning in human work in a time of workplace revolution, in a time of public reckoning with racism and inequality, and in a time of global pandemic that has disrupted our world and diminished our relations in myriad ways. In addition to looking at work through these lenses, we have been required to consider long-standing and unacceptable circumstances of work in America that cause 2/3 of us to be disengaged, according to Gallup. Checked out, doing the minimum, hanging in there until retirement. For too many Americans, work is a draining and dissatisfying experience. The pandemic has exacerbated this situation and become a consequential factor in the state of work. We begin our conversation where we ended last year with the question of the meaning of work or the meanings of work and a meaningful life, or as Miroslav Wolf puts it, who we spoke with last year, flourishing life. When work is truly meaningful, it possesses significance, it counts. It has a useful quality or purpose. It is valuable to and fulfilling of our identities and our ultimate concerns. A good way to spend what the poet Mary Oliver calls our one wild and precious life. Work becomes meaningful when it aligns with what we live for, when it advances what we hold to be the purpose of our lives. This is all very deep and personal, and not something we are inclined to talk about in public, not something we talk about at work. And then a pandemic happens, and life becomes totally chaotic for months on end. Existential questions about unfulfilling work cannot be denied. Soul searching befalls us. Is my job meaningful to me? Am I settling for less than I should? Should I just say no to going back to my old ways and walk away before I lose my nerve? And then a pandemic happens. Tonight, we will discuss an unprecedented pattern of American worker behavior that has emerged since our April conversation, that could be an inflection point, a turning point in the state of work in the United States. So some analysts are saying. They say the pandemic has irrevocably changed what people expect from work, and that these new patterns of behavior are the proof. Because so many people are now embracing new expectations, work, they say, will need to change or current patterns will persist. New expectations mean new understandings of meaningful work, coupled with resolve to change. Perhaps you have enjoyed this conversation tonight because you have heard or read about this so-called great resignation or great attrition or the big quit. You may have quit your job in the last months, perhaps without another one in hand. You may be thinking about quitting soon. If not you, chances are good you know someone in this vast and diverse population. In any case, I'm very glad that you have joined tonight because we need to ask whether we are witnessing the beginning of an unorganized but collectively powerful movement of workers who will somehow change work for all of us, and perhaps for the better, hopefully for the better. If there is a movement, what can it teach us about good and meaningful life, meaningful work? What should we affirm about these new aspirations of millions of workers today? Should we applaud their courage to walk away and sometimes start over? I am delighted to welcome to this conversation tonight two veteran professionals in human resources and workforce development who will help us to understand the big quit and what it means for personal and social well-being today. Jill Berg is owner and president of Sperion in North Dakota, South Dakota, and West Central Minnesota. Sperion provides recruiting and staffing services to clients with workforce needs that include finding, placing, and supplying employees, managers, and executives for a variety of businesses and organizations. In this work, she draws upon 25 years of experience building, acquiring, and selling her own companies. She employs this experience as well in her own consulting company, Insight Consulting, which provides advice and training for leaders, teams, and organizations informed by the predictive index system. Jill has been recognized on numerous occasions for her professional excellence and has served in leadership positions for numerous professional and human services organizations. She is a graduate of Ambassador University in Pasadena, California, and the mother of a cover. Joyce Norals is Chief Human Resources Officer and Vice President at Lutheran Social Service of Minnesota. She joined LSS Minnesota 21 years ago and oversees all employee operations for a nonprofit faith-based organization that provides 25 lines of service for 1 in 65 Minnesotans, and now currently has 2,300 employees statewide. Prior to joining LSS, Joyce served as Director of Personnel for the 5,500 employees of the Canadian Pacific Railroad and worked in human resources management for Honeywell's Commercial Aviation Systems Division. She's active in professional associations, has received advanced certification in her field. 12 years ago, Joyce was recognized by the Catholic Spirit of the Archdiocese of Minneapolis and St. Paul for her leadership. A native of Chicago, she is a graduate of Loyola University and the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota. Welcome, Jill and Joyce. And welcome to our Zoom webinar audience, and welcome to our campus audience in Berg Auditorium. It's delightful to be together. Our program this evening is scheduled to run until 8 o'clock, but Joyce and Jill have kindly consented to run long if we have extensive conversations. To our audience on Zoom, feel invited to submit your questions at any point. We will start to look at those in about a half an hour. And to our Berg audience, we have a microphone, and at various point, I will invite you to the microphone to pose your questions. So with that, let us begin. We've envisioned a kind of a three-part type conversation where we want to get a sense of what's going on. It's always a good place to start. And then ask, why is this happening? And think about what it means for workers, for organizations, and those kinds of things. So we'll start by kind of thinking about the national scene, and then I'm going to ask our guests to talk about what they're seeing in their own environments. But I think we all want to be comfortable with this situation about who's really quitting across the United States. What do these numbers look like, and how significant are they? So Jill or Joyce, would you like to share some thoughts about that?
So who should start? Hello, everyone. I regret that we can't see you and really be there with you. So Per has offered an interesting question. And I think the numbers vary depending on industry. We do know that this is the first time in decades that we have encountered something that was so disruptive So the pandemic is probably the most disruptive occurrence that I have experienced in my work career. And I won't tell you how long that spans because it will age me, but it has been very, very disruptive. And I believe the uncertainty that we're faced with, and we continue to be faced with, has definitely impacted how people view work, and also, I believe, have caused people to pause and consider what's important to them. So we know from the data we've seen turnover or people leaving the workforce in all levels or all job families across all industries. We know particularly, I think in fields such as hospitality, and as well as professional careers, people are beginning to reassess, I believe, their values. Jill, how would you characterize what we're experiencing now?
Thank you, Joyce. You know, like you, I have been in the business for 30 years and I have never experienced any kind of phenomenon like we have experienced. You know, this is an unprecedented situation with not only, you know, millions of people exiting, but the speed at which they're exiting the workforce, and also the length of time that it's taking to get people back to work. And of course, you know, from my experience, the longer people are off work, the less likely they are to return to work. And so that creates a lot of other social issues within our world that we live in. But as I travel across the country and I talk to owners of businesses, distribution, logistics, manufacturing, banking, whatever industry it is, they're all experiencing the same thing. So we certainly aren't in this alone. But what we do have to figure out is we have to figure out how we're going to turn the big quit or the great resignation and flip that switch into the great retention. Because if we don't, we will not be able to survive as a country or as a business.
It will be challenging, that's for sure.
So we're seeing, you know, patterns now for months beginning in April of roughly 4 million people a month resigning. The current resignation in September is 3% of the workforce. So, and analysts are suggesting that this pattern is not about to change. I'm wondering how you're seeing that within with the work that you're doing to develop folks. Are you seeing this in your own environments?
Well, we're certainly seeing it, you know, in the staffing industry, very challenging to recruit for businesses, but also within our own internal team, you know, employers will pay whatever they need to get talent. And there's a lot of large companies that have a lot more pockets than I have, and they will throw huge sign-on bonuses, huge pay raises to get that top talent. I mean, I go back a few years and thinking about, you know, when there was 10,000 baby boomers that were retiring every day. Well, that was 3 million a year. Okay, we're talking 4 million a month now of people leaving. I mean, this is just astronomical. This is nothing that we've seen before.
Well, to that point there of throwing money at it, I think that's a short-term solution, and not all organizations have deep pockets to do that. I'm in a nonprofit, and we're the second largest nonprofit in the state of Minnesota, but we're not in a position to throw huge amounts of dollars at it. We are offering hiring bonuses, but by comparisons to some organization, they may seem small. We are offering referral bonuses to employees because we found that a referral oftentimes become one of your best employees because the person learns about the organization from someone they trust and know. And even that, even at putting money at things with the uncertainty, we're still seeing an uptick in turnover. The other thing is that I'm a bit cautious about is that we know money is not a long-term motivator. And so we have seen where people come in for the sign-on bonus, stay long enough to maybe receive it, and then they're back out the door. So again, for me, I think to your earlier point, Jill, looking at what we need to do to retain employees and how we do that is going to become really key. And I think employers will have to begin to really examine the workplace culture, because that's where I believe the rubber hits the road. So we know employees leave people for bad managers. That is now, I think, because the treadmill stopped with the pandemic, everything came to a screeching halt, which then gave us an opportunity to pause in a way that we never had to before, to really reflect on what is important to us. And so what am I willing to go back to, and why will I go back there? So in a lot of my professional levels, and I say that's to the audience, because LSS has 25 different businesses, from direct care services to behavioral health to adoption and everything in between. And so I got 25 different work environments. And what will motivate an individual to stay oftentimes have more to do with how they either contribute and feel that their work gives them meaning, and how they're valued. So I think we have a number of challenges as we look forward with this change in employee expectations. And they're changing a lot faster than I believe most employers will be able to adapt.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Joyce. And I see it from the perspective of companies that not only have a business strategy, but have an equally significant talent optimization strategy, are the ones that suffered much less financially during the pandemic. Companies that, treat their people like things, like a product coming in the door and, helping them accomplish their goals, those are not the companies that are going to thrive. And there's really 4 things that employees are looking for, and you have to have alignment on all 4, because if one of them is not aligned, what will happen is you will have some level of disengagement. So I call it the 4 forces of engagement. And the first one is the alignment with the job. They have to be in the right job. And I think there was a lot of evaluation that happened during the pandemic of, is this the right role for me? And now maybe I'm working remotely or in a hybrid situation, and that changed everything. The second one is their alignment with their manager. And, let's face it, managers are burned out. They are fried. They are just absolutely sandwiched between the goals and objectives and results and top management. And they are being squeezed so hard that they just don't have the bandwidth to support their people and develop their people. The third one is the alignment with the team. And depending on, if you're in office or away from the office, that alignment can go either way. It can be working to your advantage or your disadvantage, depending on what the business model is. And the very last one is the alignment to the organization. Does the organizational culture and goals and objectives really truly meet, what my goals and objectives are? And I think those are the things you discussed, Joyce, that you really they've been evaluating throughout the pandemic, and they're really questioning whether that value of work and that culture of work is what they want going forward. I agree.
Just to pull this together a little bit before we dig deeper into what's going on. So I hear you saying that the great resignation or the big quit, what's really important here is this shift in expectations and what that will require of businesses to retain employees. But it's a culture change among sort of the culture of workers. Is that a fair generalization?
I think that's a pretty good generalization.
Is it feeling within within the realms of management and the C-suite and so on, that there's also a kind of a shift in power that's happening in terms of the capacity of workers to bargain and so on? Because I've been reading that, usually in a downturn economy, that's a time when employers take the upper hand. But the argument here is that the extent of the resignation and the fact that, many people, 40% of these folks are doing it without another job in hand, says something about the resolve to really see change that really seems very striking.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point, Per. I just really truly believe that people are seeing things through a different filter. I think they're seeing, what's important in my life. Is my health important, and is my family important, and is my safety important, and what are those things? And it may not be the 12-hour workday or the 8-hour workday. I really, one of the challenges with the remote workforce, and back in January when we did our talent optimization report through the predictive index, 97% of CEOs said they were going to allow some type of remote or hybrid work going forward. Well, today it's closer to about 80%. So you can see this coming down, because what's their experience is they're having difficulty driving the business strategy with all of these moving components. And when you think about, the communication, the three things that employees are wanting today is, communication, collaboration, and connection, which is really building the culture of your organization, and how challenging that is when you've got some of your workers in-house, some of your workers 100% remote, some partially remote, some never going to come back to work. I mean, it's just a very, very challenging time, and not everybody is equipped to pivot at the speed and at the level that they need to pivot to be successful in those areas. And maybe they weren't that good to begin with, and now it's really showing.
Yeah.
Good. Joyce mentioned that, the short-term response is to look at wage issues, bonuses, and those kind of things, but that's not a long-term solution. Can we kind of turn now to what do you see to be the deepest needs that people want, besides, more friendly work arrangements, but what are they yearning for? Because I as you know, I was quite taken by the report that McKinsey released in September, and they claim that really the top 3 reasons that they see for quitting are all about relationships. First of all, not feeling valued by their organization, as Jill has mentioned, not feeling valued by their manager, but also not feeling any sense of belonging, and that persons of color report this on a more higher rate than white workers. But it's striking that it's really about looking for some way to find relationships that are deep, and looking for this idea of being valued. And I wonder if you could unpack that a little bit, and whether you would agree with that.
I would say I would agree with much of that. At LSS, we do an employee engagement survey, and we have learned consistently, since we've been utilizing this particular instrument, that people long for deeply meaningful work. They really want to know that their work has purpose and that it makes a difference. And it also makes a difference in their lives as well. And that has always come out as a top indicator for our workforce. And I can say that, and I feel pretty confident in saying that, because as I mentioned, we have numerous work environments. For example, I have people that actually walk the streets looking for homeless youth, because we serve homeless youth. I don't know if many of us would have the, I call it courageous ethic to go out and search for homeless people. But from that environment there where I'm walking the street, to caring for a person with disabilities, to sitting in an office, that connection Jill spoke of with the organization is really fundamentally important to, I think, most people. So sometimes we work because we have to have a job, right, to keep a roof over our head and food on our table. But when we get beyond that there, we want to have work that has purpose for us, where we add value, and that work is meaningful. I also, as Jill pointed out, that connection with others in the workplace and colleagues or co-workers. I've seen where a few bad co-workers could literally drive good employees out, especially if a manager doesn't have the skills to interrupt and correct that work environment. And so how you manage that work environment and create a work environment that people feel valued and respected from colleagues as well as from management is also very, very critical.
Jill, would you agree that is that a fair critique of large parts of the workplace in America, that this yearning for being valued and belonging is really deficient and absent, or is this just a change in expectation that is asking a lot of the workplace? I mean, how do you read it?
Well, I think, you know, the worker of today, regardless of age or position, they want the 3 C's, which is, I want a manager that communicates and cares about me. And it's this authentic and transparent. I want a manager or I want a department or a team that collaborates. People who've suffered the most during the pandemic are the individual contributors. And next to them are the managers, okay? Because they are the types of people that need a support network when they need them. And they're not necessarily the ones that are going to reach out all of the time if they need that interaction. And then the third one is that connection. And I think that's really, really important. But the challenge that we have as we move into this huge crisis that we have with labor is that managers are not able to spend the time having people development conversations and really supporting and working with their people. And now is the time that we need to do that more than ever. And that's my biggest concern. And so to Joyce's point, that connection to the organization is critical. But I've also talked to dozens of people who have said to me, if I will stay in my job that I can't stand as long as I can be remote. So, you know, everybody has different motivators, and it's really hard to pinpoint what some of it is. I want to be home so that I can walk the dog 3 times a day. I've heard that. I want to be home so that I can see my kids off to school, and then I want to be around so I can pick them up at 3:15. You know, this whole transition that we've seen is allowing a much more fluid type workforce. It's really not built around the hours that we put in, but more about the work that we accomplish and what we get done. And I think that's been really hard for corporate America to wrap their head around a little bit. I think that's a bit of a shift, particularly in more of those production and distribution logistics centers.
Before we go now to some of your reflections on where we need to go constructively in the future to respond to these expectations and these interests, I also want to touch on the relational dimension that people are reporting in terms of family life and family responsibilities, because apparently 45% of those who are quitting cite the need to take care of family as a very influential reason, and that burden falls disproportionately on women in America right now. You know, and many people have discovered that working from home provides them with some kind of new space where these things might be more manageable and more meaningful. But there's also, we know that with the challenges that people have with schooling and these kind of things, it's a very rough go at home for many people. But what you know, what have we learned there? I mean, I think we've all learned that it's very interesting to interact with our colleagues in their home environments. And so the line between the public and the private has now been completely mashed together. And so that the whole is the reality that we're whole people with whole lives is now pretty evident to everyone in a way. What would you like us to know about the new expectations or challenges that employers have to address in the time of COVID right now and perhaps long term?
I think it has everything to do with flexibility. Employees want flexibility. They want to set the guardrails and the rules around how they want to work, when they work, and where they're going to work. Many people have moved and left, you know, the corporate culture to live somewhere completely different, because with remote work, you can live anywhere. And, you know, so they're deciding on where I'm going to live. They're deciding on when I want to work. In other words, if I want to work from, you know, 8 till 5, that's my choice. But if I'd rather work from 2 till 10, that's my choice. And I think this whole issue that you brought up here with childcare, which is a huge issue. If you let go of your daycare or your before school or after school programs, It's very, very challenging. And of course, the cost of that is going up because the cost of hiring those people is skyrocketing. And so I think there's people that are saying, you know what, maybe it's just as well that I stay home with the kids, and then I'll be there for them. So, I mean, we have so many dynamics happening that it isn't just one thing, it's myriads of things that are impacting, the decisions that people are making. And it's not good or bad, it's just the decisions that they need to make. And I think it gets back to taking care of my family, taking care of my health, and being connected to the community and the work that I want to be doing.
I agree. I think flexibility is a key driver. And I'll speak to the matter of women, even if they're in a two-parent home or single parent, typically the burden of the pandemic and its impact has fallen primarily or mostly on women, because many of us are in a traditional role as a caregiver in that way. But I would like to also talk about, for single family or one person households, what has happened with the pandemic and working remote is gaining that flexibility. And so that connection now, instead of rushing out the door to get everybody off to school and childcare and work, I'm there and very much in touch with my family. I'm still getting my work done. So I've had employees say, well, I get up before the kids get started and I get this done, get them off to school, I go back. And then even when they go to bed, I can go back and do work. So many feel like there's increased productivity. We have seen in our organization that we haven't lost productivity. And so people are saying, if you require me to come back into the office 5 days a week, I'm going to rethink this job here, because the flexibility has allowed them to really integrate the values of home and life and be present and available there as much as it allows them to be present and available at work.
I agree 100%, Joyce. That's absolutely right.
Before we turn to some questions, I'd like to invite you both to share with us your thoughts about how you envision the opportunity of both workers and employers to address these situations. Joyce, you've mentioned that LSS has already had in place for a long time, I think, a fairly sophisticated understanding of the holistic needs of employees. And I'm wondering how you feel that's holding up under these real challenges. You sort of had a test moment here. And are you seeing that the system you've created is working, or it needs to be adjusted? And I'm also curious, Jill, the way in which you're seeing managers now who have to act quickly, and where are they going beyond let's find some more incentive through pay and things like that? Are you seeing them trying to learn from other people? What do you see happening, and how hard is this going to be?
Well, I do a lot of workshops for a lot of different types of companies. And in fact, I was just in Vegas and Denver in the last couple of weeks as I'm speaking at national conferences, but also as I'm conducting workshops for various groups. What I'm seeing is most companies that are trying to get product in the door and out the door, they have so many issues with supply chain and staffing. If they're not on quarantine, they didn't show that day for whatever reason. I mean, there's just so many dynamics these poor managers are dealing with that they just do not have the bandwidth to focus on their people. And so I feel like, I'm the one person band, because I'm pounding on the same drum over and over. And it starts with self-awareness. Who am I? And what are my needs? What drives and motivates me? Because we are always going to treat our people through our lens and our perception. We're going to coach them and work with them the way we would want to be coached and worked with. And that may not be the way they need to be coached and mentored with. I liken it to eating. I mean, we can fill up on, chips and salsa, or we can take in nutrition. We have to give our people nutrition that feeds their soul And that is where I say we have to intimately know our people, what drives them, what motivates them, what they want out of life. And we have to make sure that we're having those conversations with them consistently, day in and day out. And this is where 90% of managers fail. I send out polls when I'm speaking in a 200-300 person room, and I say, tell me what percentage of your time you spend doing the tasks in your work, and what's the percentage you spend actually not talking about the work to be done with your people, but what they want out of their job. It's somewhere between 10 and 25% consistently. To me, that's a very scary statistic when you think about the big quit. We are never going to turn this around if we don't turn around and understand that for us to get business results, to drive the business strategy, we need the people, and we have to hire to the head and the heart and not just the briefcase.
Good point. Good point. So where should I first start at? I do believe that head and heart piece has to be there. And it is important that managers really learn to connect with their employees. So some of you may have heard the phrase stay interviews. And so we encourage managers to use that technique. So just for the audience here, it's really about connecting with the person and not just giving expectations around the work tasks, but how are you doing today? What's going on? What's working for you? What's not working for you? We, as a human service organization, there's nothing we do or can do unless it gets done through a person. So people are more than just an asset. They are the heart of the organization, and we try to communicate that to them. But we are seeing staff become what we call compassion fatigue. In a caregiving work environment, unlike maybe manufacturing, you have to give so much of yourself in supporting another person, to walk alongside with them and help them build the things that they need to become sustainable. That takes a lot of who you are. And so we're seeing a lot of compassion fatigue, especially with a staffing crisis, because as Jill pointed out, there's not an industry across this country that aren't struggling to find people. The most recent statistics in Minnesota says there's less than a person, like I think it was 0.6 person for each vacancy. And in this state alone, we have over 200,000 vacancies. That's across the state. So there's not an area in the state that isn't suffering for staffing. And that's, of course, across the country. So that connection with people and really making sure you connect with them to find out how they're doing. So really, not how you doing and keep going, but how are you doing? And even if it's looking in a camera, be able to look person eyeball to eyeball to say that you matter to me. So how you doing? And what can I do to help support you through the day? Do you need that support during the day? That is really, really important. It does make a difference.
So to go back to what McKinsey's finding, and people not feeling valued and not feeling belonging, I hear what you both said for the last few minutes is exactly the kind of practices that would convey that value and would establish those relationships. But for some reason, in the culture of many businesses, that just can't happen for reasons of capacity, or it's just not part of corporate culture. Is that a fair analysis?
Well, I think we can't broad brush that, because there certainly are businesses, AKA, Joyce's fabulous mission, that's so connected to their mission and their people. I think where the challenge comes in is the businesses that have typically been focused on, I'm going to call them things, okay, product type businesses, because, the global competitiveness is so huge, and they've been so challenged with staffing for so many years. I mean, this is just, the pandemic has just accelerated it. This has been going on for the 20 some years that I've been in business. We've had very, very low unemployment, very difficult time finding people. It's just probably accelerated as a result and is happening quicker than what it has in the past. But, you know, there are businesses, it doesn't mean that they don't care. I just think that they just haven't prioritized the type of training that Joyce is referring to, that how are you today? I call it the 4x4. You know, it's just a term I like to use. And it's basically says, you know, what's going well for you this week or this month? You know, what's challenging you that is keeping you up at night? You know, what kind of training do you need to be more effective? And what can I do to support you? I mean, very basic questions that anyone can ask. But if I talked to the 12 production managers that were sitting in my room yesterday in Denver, if I'd have asked them that question, they'd have looked at me like I had just fallen, you know, out of the airplane. So, you know, because they don't think like that, you know, they're pushing product out the door as fast as they can. And the needs that they have are so huge, and they're working so many hours and so hard that, you know, they're not going to really ask anybody. You know, they'll probably go say, hey, how's it going today? But it's not in the area of strength. They're just doing it as a whitewash. It's not really a personal connection. They're not really understanding what drives and motivates that person and speaking to them in that respect.
Thank you.
And I just want to say, Jill, you're really spot on with that, because you can't broad brush it, even in a human service organization, to the culture you were asking about, Per, where culturally we haven't been trained to think that way, is get the job done, we're here to do a job, this sort of thing here. And even in human service, you still have some of that there. It takes a lot of intentionality and the individual embracing that desire to make that change. So I don't want to paint a perfect picture, even of LSS, because the human dynamic, no matter if you're in a nonprofit, for-profit, boardroom, church basement, wherever, the human dynamic continues to operate. And if you don't have that intentionality and that ability or desire to express a genuine concern for another, it won't happen.
Thank you. So do we have some questions? Please come to the mic. I'm going to see if Carol has anything for me online. She may or may not, but I invite anyone to come forward and explore their curiosity at this point. Who's first? Thank you, Terry.
Terry Brandt, thank you for your words today. Perry, you did a great job in kind of setting up what's brought us to this point, the pandemic being a big piece of that. And what I'm hearing from you, Jill and Joyce, is to say that we can go deeper into the story to say that we'll see a different story as we dig into particular industries, or if we dig into gender, male and female, or if we dig into a closer look at what's happened in these past months regarding race, white population diversity. I think, Perry, you alluded to that. So my question is, what about generations? Do you see a different mindset among generations in the Great Resignation, from Gen Xers to millennials to Gen Zers? Do you see that? Are those populations responding different? Is there a different mindset?
I think to some degree, but not fully. I think technology for some generations is a challenge, but people are adapting to technology because it's been such an explosion there. And I'm seeing generations from those who are boomers that are still in there, still working, and Gen X and Y, all saying that they appreciate the flexibility of working in a hybrid work environment. And I'm hearing from all generations, they still want to have that connection. So coming into the workplace they all still share some meaning around that, but they don't want to give up the flexibility. Technology can be a challenge for some of us, but even those generations are working through that. And I think the iPhones and having grandkids that are swiping phones in front of them constantly and the like, and even teaching some of us how to use some technology is bringing us more together in similar preferences than apart.
Yeah, you know, that is such a great question. I've always believed that any generation can be highly motivated if they're given the right work that speaks to them in their area of strength. Okay. So when it comes to this topic of the Great Resignation or the Big Quit, I think it's across many generations. I mean, this is a true story. You might laugh at this, but I'm getting a massage, and the gal that's giving the massage says to me, "You just would not believe how many of my friends don't work." And I said, "Well, what do you mean they don't work? How old are they?" And she said, "Well, less than 30. And I said, "Well, how do they pay their bills?" She said, "Well, I don't know." She said, "They game and they do this and that." And she said, "But I don't know what they do all day because I'm working." And I said, "And who are these people?" She said, "They're my friends." Or you said, "You still call them your friends?" But you know, the reality is that I think it's across the spectrum. And you know, it goes back to, what do people want? Where do they want? How do they want to work? And where do they want to work? And they want to do it on their terms. And that you know, and this too shall pass. And we're in this for a long time, but I really truly believe this will pass. And it's called a big recession, okay? Where businesses have to lay off a lot of people. This is when, you know, the employers will start, and I certainly am not hoping for that by any means, but you know, that could change some of this a bit, you know, and that's certainly not a good solution that we would want. So I just think we have to pivot, we have to change how we're thinking, and we have to really become people-centric.
I thank Terry for his question, because I have seen some reflection on this, that again, there does appear to be a generational gap between certain generations of managers and up and coming workers. And the point that was made was very intriguing, from given what we do here at the college. It went to this effect. It was like, for 2 generations now, we've been trying to convince people that collective activity is good, as opposed to individual activity, that working together is a good way to be human. And we're actually working with workers who believe that. And when they don't find that in the workplace, they're deeply disappointed. So again, this concern for belonging could be another way of saying, I look to work as a place where I can work in community and work in collaboration with others. And for our guests, I mean, they need to know that at a place like Concordia, the dominant learning paradigm now is very striking in terms of this shift toward this idea that we work in collaborative, team-based ways, that the solitary mind is not adequate for the future of the planet. And we have to learn to collaborate in diverse groups, be creative. And we would hope that will actually make a difference in the way people behave in the world. So I think it will, again, could be another way in which work will be transformed by what's happening across higher ed in America. Other questions?
Yeah, Per, I was just going to make a comment on that.
Sure.
So personality, or I call it DNA, is a bell curve, right? So 50% of the population wants collaboration and wants to be in teams. The other 50% are more independent and want to rely more on their own abilities and skills to move things forward. So I don't think I go back to, it's not an all in one way or the other. This goes back to what speaks to my people. And if you have a collaborative person that likes to work in a team, then they need to be on a team. But I know of some amazing individual contributors that are happy to work independently, and that's their preferred work style. So this goes back to, you know, we can't just put people and say, this is the model for this company or this organization. It has to be based on what the person's needs are. That is what will engage them, and that's what will keep them, just cause them to stay.
Yeah.
Larry Pappenfuss, and I'm wondering if you've heard any greater conversation around a 4-day work week. I think we've often thought we reward people with money or time, and maybe the companies that can't afford increases in salaries in a more competitive market could think about holding salaries steady, but going to a shorter work week, hopefully not losing too much on the productivity side. But I'd be curious, is there more conversation about that?
I haven't seen greater conversation about a 4-day work week. And I can remember 10 years ago, that was hard for a lot of organizations to wrap their head around, because you should be here Monday through Friday. We have to serve the client. We have to be here to work across the organization. I think with the pandemic and having the opportunity to work in a hybrid situation, to work remote, has maybe shifted people's thinking about a 4-day work week to more around flexibility in any given day to get work done. So if I could get the critical and essential things that need to be done, if I can collaborate across the organization with those I need to and ensure they have what they need from me and vice versa, then it's not about days, it's more about flexibility. What I worry about as an HR person with the hybrid situation and working remote is that the lines that we maybe don't have the hard boundaries we used to have in our search for work-life balance. Because now I have this flexibility, I can get up and work, I can run to a medical appointment, pick up a sick kid, whatever that is, and come back and still work into the evening and the light. That our work and home life has become more blurred. It used to be that I could walk into a building and I knew my day started, and when I walk out, my days ended. And that's not necessarily the case. So we get all this great productivity, but I believe that leads to a lot of fatigue as well. We get the flexibility, but we lose some things in the process. But I don't think it's so much a 4-day week anymore. I think it's more around whether or not you'll give me the flexibility. If I demonstrate I can give you what you need and expect from me, then give me what I need and would expect from you in terms of flexibility. I don't know if you see that differently, Jill, or not, but I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think that's part of it, but I think the progressive businesses, the ones that are really cutting edge and leading in this area, are saying our office hours are 7 to 6. If you want to come in the office, that's great. If you don't, you can work remotely. We're paying you to do the job. It isn't the solid 8 that we used to maybe use as our measuring stick. It's really, are you meeting your goals and objectives? And if that means that, you work 7 days one week and you work 3 the next, and besides, how do I know if somebody is working remotely outside of the fact that I might be on a call with them? How do I know if they're really working or not? All I can measure is the output of what they're getting done. Even in manufacturing, we have to be thinking differently, and we're really working hard with our managers on this. We're saying, it isn't the number of people you need for the shift. It's how many shifts do you need to fill, okay? So if that means that you are running 6 days a week and you need to fill 3 shifts, we might need to have one person working Monday, Tuesday, Friday, and the next person working, when they can, and it might be part-time and full-time schedules. So we can't think about as a person, but what are the hours that we need coverage? And this is where it's very challenging in these industries, because they're just not there yet, but they're getting there, and they're starting to realize that, hey, if we don't do this, we're going to be running short all the time, and we're going to continue to burn out our managers.
Thank you. Any further questions? Please.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you, Joyce. My name is Trevor Dufault. My question is, when discussing sign-on bonuses and pay raises that would appeal to talents of workers, how would you address the appealing factor that some employees were able to make just as much and sometimes even more from unemployment benefits during the pandemic and how it has impacted their desire to return to work?
Oh, I'd love to talk about this. Oh, yeah, this is you just really poked the bear, you know that, right? So this has been a real challenge, and whatever side, low wages, high wages, whatever side you're on, whatever you think the minimum wage should be or not isn't really important. But what it has done is it's forced, in North Dakota anyway, about a minimum wage of about $20 an hour just to find somebody that will go to work. So if you had someone, let's say, making $15 an hour, which is about $31,000 a year in pre-pandemic, and they received, just for round numbers, let's say they had 400 a week coming in state unemployment, and they had the extra 6 coming from the feds. Now they're at 1,000 a week, so that's $4,000 a month. Okay, so now we're up to 48,000 a year. Okay, now let's throw the the $1,200 stimulus on top of that. And if it's a dual household, let's double that. And then let's throw the second stimulus in of $600, per person for house within the household. And then now let's add the child care tax credit in there. I mean, you're talking, when you add all those numbers, it's about 50, 60,000 a year. And we have to remember that not everyone lives at the same standard of living. And if you're used to living on 30 or 40 or whatever that number is, and now you've doubled your income, that hangover effect is there for months after the benefits end. And I think that's one of the challenges that we're going to see, and we're going to see this now. We won't see this change at least until into the new year, because once the holidays hit, it's always a downtime for employment. People are thinking, well, if I'm not working, I'm just going to take the holidays off. And so, that's just adding to the challenge that we're going to have. And plus, we don't have the student population that we have had in the past, because they've been working remotely, or studying online. And so they're not out there to take a lot of the positions, that would be in hospitality and restaurants, nor do we have the high school population, because again, homeschooling, not getting out as much, but also more involved now in extracurricular activities. So, it's just this spiraling effect of what's happening with the workforce. And I don't believe that the older generation is really ever going to go back to work, because I think when you look at the stock market, what the stock market has done, they've all been meeting with their financial planners, and their financial planners are saying you're set. And they're thinking, hey, I'm kind of liking this flexibility, this freedom. You know what? I enjoyed my time off. And so I think there's just so many things happening. But yes, I couldn't agree more. This, I call it the governmental interference, has definitely hurt the private sector.
Well, I don't have any data to support what I'm about to say, but I have some mixed feelings about that. I think when they increased the unemployment benefits, the child care credit, not everybody got those things. You had to meet certain requirements to get those things. Paycheck protection, here again, organizations had to meet certain requirements to get those things. So it wasn't just a pot of money just thrown out that everybody had equal access to. And while I do think that people thought, yeah, I'm making more unemployed than I did working, I think there's probably a small percentage of people that took that as a gravy train, because I do think there's an innate desire for people to contribute. So yes, that some of that probably did happen, but I don't believe not as much as the narrative would lead us to believe. And here again, I say I don't have the data to support that, but that's just my belief there. I do think what that did, though, the increased unemployment benefits and the like, said to people that it's not fair, that pay equity should be really looked at and examined and should be accessible to us as a worker. And so that it has pushed the drive, the advocacy, and public policy to push the minimum wage up. And then with the crisis of staffing, we're finding that that's forcing that wage to go up as well. So I don't think it is necessarily an abuse. I think it was absolutely needed when the pandemic hit and we had to shut down, just bring things to a halt. You can't just let society just fall away to the roadside. So government did have to step in. And this is not a political view at all. And thank God that they did, because many people needed it. When schools shut down and daycare centers shut down and people were falling dead before our eyes in a day or two, we needed that support as a country. And I'm glad our country could do that for us. And again, I don't believe the narrative that we have repeatedly heard about what unemployment benefits have done, because they've stopped now. I believe they ended, what was it, September? And even with unemployment, for example, now, if you don't go to work, and when we talk about this vaccination, for example, because you don't want to get vaccinated, you may not be eligible for unemployment because work is available. So yes, there was some abuse. I think the benefit of it, though, was it helped organizations and public policy around setting the minimum wage, or what some might call a livable wage. It pushed that in the system, and we've seen people respond to it. Either I'm not going to work in an industry that doesn't provide me what I need to keep a roof over my head and food on the table, as well as some of the other things we talked about today. So I do have a different view about that.
No, and I respect that, Joyce. I think that's, I think that's great. I just know, from the data within our 4 offices, of how many times, we've offered and they've said, no, I make more money on unemployment, I'm not going to consider it. And it's a fairly substantial number of people. And it is unfortunate because, it does give everybody that bad rap that maybe not everybody falls in that situation.
Thank you.
I don't know if we answered your question, young man, but hopefully we gave you something to consider.
One more question.
Hi, my name is Soka and I'm senior at Concordia College. And I'm wondering how do you think the Great Resignation impacts the mindset that college students, especially the senior students who are graduating soon? Yeah.
Yeah.
You have great opportunity, lady.
Yes, come work for us.
www.spherion.com.
Yes, I agree.
Future's bright. Future's very bright for you. And there's, there's opportunity for new grads. There's great opportunity for young professionals, to grow into leadership positions as more mature people leave. That gives them opportunities for growth and leadership. I mean, I see some real positives.
And I hope you're looking for the possibilities because they're out there. I think there's great opportunity that is available. And I'm going to say many organizations are steadily recruiting, trying to get on college campuses, connecting with your career offices about the opportunities that are available to them. So listen, it could be your oyster. So take advantage of it.
Very nice. I think with that, we're going to wrap up for tonight. I think you've given us some marvelous insight into the complexity of the world of work that we try to talk about in terms of the world that we live in, that it's a very complex, interdependent world that we have to try to understand. And I'm feeling like we have a lot of work to do as a society and as organizations to make this right. We've looked at some big challenges last year, but these these are looking really, really challenging. On one level, we know what we can do. We have some practices that we know work and we need to do them, but you've also illustrated how rapidly things move, how interdependent we are in a global system, and actors are not always free to do everything that they would like to do in the short term. So it's going to be a bumpy ride, but we've also got really some wonderful conversation going as a society. I'm really impressed by that. For example, WGBH, you may know, TV show, if you want to watch it, they're doing a series called The Big Quit. Every week they're doing a vignette of someone who has made a big decision in their life. They're going to run that for the whole year. And that's just one example of a reflection that's going on as a result of this. And so we thank you so much for your contribution to this. And my goodness, we wish you well in the challenges that are on your desks. So thank you so much for assisting with our reflection. I'm also grateful tonight to colleagues Carol Hedberg, Anna Benson, Todd Walwers, Wade Iverson, Michael Vick, Susan Larson, Chris Mason, and Alan Christensen for their assistance with our program tonight. I want to thank our audience for coming out. It's been wonderful to be together, and I appreciate your wonderful questions. For those of you that are new to this conversation and would like to know more, you can find videos of last year's program archived on our website. And please join this conversation again on January 25, when we will talk with writer Jonathan Maselik, author of a forthcoming book on burnout culture, who will address the topic of getting a life, finding meaning beyond employment. Good night from the Lorenzen Center for Faith and Work at Concordia College. Keep safe, and wishing you good work now in the future, graced with respect, engagement, and meaning. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jill, it was a pleasure really being here with you. I so
Thank you.
appreciate your input. Per, thank you for inviting me to join, and I hope we delivered just what you needed
Absolutely.
for tonight.
It was really fun. Thank you all.
Jill, we'll have to stay in touch.
I
Okay.
like that. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Good night.
Good night.